Welcome to Human Stories. Before we dive into this incredible tale of hidden heroes and life-changing moments, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you believe every story of quiet courage deserves to be heard. Your support helps us share these powerful narratives with the world. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had always prided herself on being observant. At 28, she was one of the youngest attending physicians at Metropolitan General Hospital, and her sharp eye for detail had saved countless lives during her 3 years on staff. She noticed when a patient's color changed by the slightest degree, when a heart monitor showed the faintest irregularity, when something in a colleague's expression suggested doubt or concern. But somehow, she had never really noticed Marcus Chen. Marcus worked the night shift in the surgical wing, appearing around 10 p.m. with his cleaning cart and disappearing by dawn. He was probably in his 40s, though it was hard to tell. Average height, unremarkable build, always wearing the same navy blue maintenance uniform. His dark hair was kept short and neat, and he moved through the hospital corridors with a quiet efficiency that made him almost invisible. Sarah had exchanged perhaps a dozen words with him over 3 years. "Good evening, doctor. Have a good night. Thank you." Always polite, always brief, always professional. He cleaned around surgical equipment with careful precision, never disrupting the sterile environment, never asking questions about the medical procedures he witnessed. The other staff members seemed to regard him the same way Sarah did, as a reliable but unremarkable presence. The nurses appreciated that he never left streaks on the windows and always restocked the paper towels. The surgeons valued his discretion. He never gossiped about what he saw during late-night emergency procedures. The administrators liked that he never called in sick and always completed his assigned areas before his shift ended. Marcus Chen was, by all appearances, exactly what he seemed, a quiet, dependable janitor who did his job well, and went home. On Tuesday evening, October 15th, Sarah was reviewing patient charts when she noticed Marcus beginning his rounds. He moved systematically through the surgical prep area, mopping floors with the same methodical precision she'd observed hundreds of times before. His cleaning cart was organized with almost military precision, supplies arranged by type and frequency of use, everything in its designated place. "Evening, Dr. Mitchell," he said as he worked around her station. "Good evening, Marcus," she replied, not looking up from her charts. IT was their standard exchange, brief and professional. Sarah finished her paperwork and headed toward the emergency department for her night shift. She had no idea that within 6 hours, everything she thought she knew about the quiet janitor would be shattered completely. The call came in at 2:47 a.m. Incoming trauma, multiple victims. The dispatch crackled over the hospital's communication system. Motor vehicle accident on Highway 9. 3 casualties, at least 1 critical. ETA 12 minutes. Sarah was in the break room grabbing coffee when the announcement echoed through the corridors. She immediately abandoned her cup and headed toward the trauma bay, her mind shifting into the focused state that emergency medicine demanded. 3 years of night shifts had taught her to read the urgency in dispatch calls, and this one carried the weight of life-threatening injuries. The trauma bay buzzed with preparation. Nurses laid out surgical instruments, checked monitor connections, and prepared 4 bags. The blood bank was alerted for potential transfusions. Dr. James Morrison, the chief of surgery, appeared in surgical scrubs, his grey hair still messy from being woken up at home. "What do we know?" Sarah asked Janet Rodriguez, the head trauma nurse. "Multi-car collision," Janet replied, pulling on latex gloves. "Drunk driver ran a red light, hit a family's sedan head-on. Parents are stable but injured. Their son." She paused, checking her notes. 24 years old, multiple trauma. Paramedics reported possible internal bleeding, head injury, and at least 1 broken bone. Through the large windows facing the ambulance bay, Sarah could see flashing lights approaching through the October drizzle. The familiar sound of sirens grew louder, the urgent wail that meant someone's life hung in the balance. "Here they come," Dr. Morrison announced. The first ambulance backed up to the emergency entrance, and paramedics rushed out with a stretcher. The middle-aged woman on the gurney was conscious, but clearly in pain, holding her arm at an awkward angle. "Possible fracture, mild concussion," called out the lead paramedic. "Vitals stable." The second ambulance brought the father, also conscious, with lacerations and what appeared to be a shoulder injury. Both parents were quickly triaged and taken to separate treatment areas. But it was the third ambulance that brought the real crisis. The young man on the stretcher was unconscious, his face pale and covered with blood from a head wound. His breathing was shallow and labored. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the extent of his injuries. This wasn't just trauma, this was someone fighting for his life. 24-year-old male, Daniel Harrison. The paramedic rattled off vital information as they wheeled him into the trauma bay. Found unconscious at the scene. Possible internal bleeding, suspected head trauma, left leg fracture. Blood pressure dropped significantly during transport. Pulse is weak and irregular. Sarah took one look at the patient and felt her stomach tighten. She'd seen enough emergency cases to recognize when someone was in critical condition, but this was worse than critical. This was a young man who might not survive the next hour. The medical team transferred Daniel to the trauma bed. Sarah began her initial assessment. What she found made her heart race. The head injury was severe but manageable. The broken leg, while painful, wasn't life-threatening. But the internal bleeding was catastrophic. "Get me a CT scan immediately," she ordered. "And type and cross-match for 8 units of blood." The results came back quickly, and they confirmed her worst fears. The impact had caused massive internal trauma. Daniel's spleen was severely damaged and bleeding into his abdominal cavity. Without immediate surgical intervention, he would bleed to death within hours. But the surgery required to save him was beyond Sarah's current training level. She was an excellent emergency physician, skilled at stabilizing patients and performing minor procedures. But this required the expertise of a trauma surgeon specializing in abdominal injuries. "We need Dr. Henderson," she told Dr. Morrison, referring to the hospital's lead trauma surgeon. "He's in Miami at a conference," Morrison replied grimly. "Won't be back until Thursday." "What about Dr. Rodriguez from City General?" "Also unavailable. There was a multi-car pileup downtown tonight. Every trauma surgeon in the city is either in surgery or handling other emergencies." Sarah felt panic creeping into her chest. She looked at the monitors, showing Daniel's declining vital signs. His blood pressure was continuing to drop despite the transfusions they were giving him. The internal bleeding was too severe, too fast. "There has to be someone," she said, her voice tight with stress. "Sarah," Dr. Morrison said gently. "We're doing everything we can. Sometimes—" "No," Sarah interrupted. "I won't accept that. There has to be something more we can do." She looked around the trauma bay at the other medical staff. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to Human Stories for more incredible tales of unsung heroes. Like this video to help us share these powerful stories with others who need to hear them. And tell us in the comments, have you ever encountered someone who turned out to be completely different from what you expected? Everyone was skilled, everyone was trying their best, but nobody had the specialized training needed to perform the complex abdominal surgery that could save Daniel's life. "His parents," Sarah said suddenly. "They're here. They're going to ask about their son, and I'm going to have to tell them that we're not equipped to save him." The weight of that responsibility hit her like a physical blow. In the adjacent treatment areas, Daniel's parents were being treated for their own injuries, unaware that their son was dying just rooms away. "I can't do this," Sarah whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. It was the first time in her medical career that she'd felt completely helpless. And the admission felt like a failure of everything she'd trained for. That's when Marcus Chen set down his mop. Sarah had been so focused on the patient that she hadn't noticed the janitor in the corner of the trauma bay. For 3 years, Marcus had been an invisible presence during her shifts. Always there, always working quietly, never interfering with medical procedures. But now he was walking toward the trauma bed with movements that seemed different somehow. More purposeful, more confident. "Excuse me," Sarah began, confused by his approach. "You need to step back. We're in the middle of a critical procedure." Marcus stopped beside the trauma bed and looked at the monitors displaying Daniel's vital signs. His expression was calm, focused, as if he was reading familiar information rather than witnessing a medical emergency. "Step aside," he said quietly. "I've got this." His voice carried an authority that made Sarah pause. There was something in his tone, in the way he positioned himself near the patient, that suggested he wasn't just a janitor offering misguided help. "I'm sorry, but you can't be here," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. "This is a sterile environment, and we're dealing with a critical patient." Marcus was already pulling on surgical gloves that he'd taken from the nearby dispenser. His movements were practiced, automatic, as if he'd done this thousands of times before. "This patient has a grade 4 splenic laceration with active hemorrhage," Marcus said without looking up. "His blood pressure indicates he's lost approximately 30% of his blood volume. He's got maybe 20 minutes before hypovolemic shock becomes irreversible. Sarah stared at him. The medical terminology, the precise assessment, the confidence in his diagnosis, none of it matched the quiet maintenance worker she'd known for 3 years. "How do you?" she began. "Scalpel," Marcus said simply. Janet, the trauma nurse, looked confused but found herself responding to the command in his voice. She handed him the surgical instrument, and Marcus accepted it with the familiarity of someone who'd held thousands of scalpels before. "Sir, I really need to ask you to step away from the patient," Sarah said. But even as she spoke, she was watching Marcus's hands. The way he held the scalpel, the way he positioned himself over the patient, the way he assessed the surgical site, everything suggested expertise that went far beyond basic first aid. "This young man has minutes to live," Marcus said, his voice remaining calm despite the gravity of the situation. "You can either assist me in saving him, or you can watch him die while we wait for someone with the right credentials." The directness of his statement hit Sarah like a slap. She looked at the monitors showing Daniel's deteriorating condition, then at Marcus, who was already preparing to make the first incision. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Someone who's done this before," Marcus replied. Suction. Against every protocol she'd ever learned, Sarah found herself moving to assist. Something about Marcus's confidence, his precise medical knowledge, his complete lack of uncertainty, convinced her that he knew exactly what he was doing. The incision he made was perfect, exactly where it needed to be, exactly the right depth, exactly the right angle. His technique was flawless, displaying the movements of someone who had performed this procedure not just once or twice, but hundreds of times retractor, Marcus said. His attention focused entirely on the patient. As Sarah provided the instrument. She watched in amazement as Marcus worked with surgical precision that surpassed anything she'd witnessed during her medical training. He located the source of the bleeding quickly, his hands moving with an economy of motion that spoke of extensive experience. "Clamp that vessel there," he instructed, and Sarah found herself following his directions. Without question, the transformation was remarkable. The trauma bay, which had been filled with chaos and uncertainty just minutes before, became a place of focused calm. Marcus directed the medical team with quiet authority, and everyone, nurses, technicians, even Dr. Morrison, who had arrived to observe, found themselves following his lead. "Pressure's stabilizing," Janet reported, wonder evident in her voice. "Good," Marcus said, not looking up from his work. "Dr. Mitchell, I need you to monitor his cardiac function. The blood loss put strain on his heart." Sarah nodded, still trying to process what she was witnessing. The patient's color was returning. His breathing was becoming more regular. The monitors showed vital signs that, while still serious, were no longer in the immediate danger zone. The surgery took 47 minutes. When Marcus finally stepped back from the operating table, Daniel Harrison's spleen had been repaired, the internal bleeding had been stopped, and his vital signs were stable. What should have been a fatal injury had been treated with surgical skill that belonged in the most advanced trauma centers in the country. "How is this possible?" Sarah asked, staring at the monitors showing Daniel's steady heartbeat. Marcus was already cleaning his hands at the scrub sink, his movements methodical and calm. "The patient is going to live," he said simply. "That's what matters." "Of course it matters," Sarah replied, her voice rising with confusion and amazement. "But you just performed surgery that I've only seen done by the most experienced trauma surgeons in the country. You're a janitor." "I'm a janitor now," Marcus corrected quietly. "That's all that matters." But Sarah wasn't going to let it go. The transformation she'd witnessed was too dramatic, too complete. The quiet maintenance worker who'd mopped floors for 3 years had just displayed surgical skills that surpassed her own medical training. The way you diagnosed his injuries, the surgical technique, the command presence. "That's not something you learn from watching," she said. "That's years of training, years of experience in high-pressure situations. Who are you really?" Marcus dried his hands, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "I'm someone who was in the right place at the right time." "That's not an answer." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw something flicker in his eyes. "Not regret exactly, but the weight of decisions made long ago, Dr. Mitchell," he said finally. "Some stories are better left untold." He picked up his mop and bucket, the same cleaning supplies he'd been using for 3 years. In the space of less than an hour, he'd transformed from invisible maintenance staff to master surgeon and back again. "Wait," Sarah called as he headed toward the door. "I need to understand. That patient, you saved his life. But the way you did it, the skills you demonstrated, that's not normal. That's not something someone just knows how to do. Marcus paused at the door. In my experience, Dr. Mitchell, normal is overrated. That's not an answer either. He turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw a hint of the man behind the janitor's uniform. The patient is going to need monitoring for the next 8 hours. The repair work is solid, but watch for signs of secondary bleeding. It's unlikely given the suture technique, but possible. You're giving me medical advice. I'm giving you the benefit of my experience. Dr. Morrison chose that moment to enter the trauma bay, having been called back to check on the patient's status. He approached the bed where Daniel was now stable and resting, his trained eye immediately assessing the surgical work. His expression changed as he examined the incisions, the suturing technique, the precision of the repair work. "Who performed this surgery?" he asked, his voice filled with professional admiration. Sarah glanced at Marcus, who had frozen by the door. "We had some assistance," she said carefully. Doctor. Morrison continued his examination, his amazement growing. "This is extraordinary work. The technique, the precision of the splenic repair. I've only seen a handful of surgeons capable of this level of skill. The suturing alone is textbook perfect." He turned to Sarah. "I know your abilities, and while you're skilled, this is beyond your current training. Who assisted you?" Sarah looked again at Marcus, who gave her the slightest shake of his head. She found herself at a crossroads. Tell the truth and expose whatever secret Marcus was protecting, or find a way to deflect the question. "It was a team effort," she said finally. Doctor. Morrison wasn't satisfied. "A team effort doesn't explain this level of surgical precision. This is the work of someone with advanced trauma training, probably military experience. The technique for repairing a splenic laceration like this, I've only seen it done by surgeons who've worked in combat zones." The words hung in the air like a revelation. Sarah looked at Marcus, who had gone very still. "Combat zones," she repeated. Doctor. Morrison nodded. "The efficiency, the speed, the ability to work under extreme pressure while maintaining perfect technique. This is battlefield surgery, performed by someone who learned their skills in places where there's no backup, no second chances, no room for error." Marcus had heard enough. He began moving toward the door again, but Dr. Morrison's voice stopped him. "Excuse me," the chief of surgery called out. "You're maintenance staff, right? Were you here when this surgery was performed?" Marcus turned slowly. "Yes, sir." "Did you see who worked on this patient?" "The surgeon who performed this repair." Sarah held her breath, waiting to see how Marcus would respond. The moment stretched out, filled with tension and unspoken questions. "I saw Dr. Mitchell save the patient's life." Marcus said simply that it was technically true, but Sarah knew it was far from the whole truth. Dr. Morrison, however, seemed to accept the answer, though his expression remained puzzled. "Well, whoever provided the surgical expertise, this is remarkable work," he said. "Sarah, I want you to write up a complete report. This technique should be studied and potentially taught to our trauma residents." After Dr. Morrison left, Sarah found herself alone with Marcus in the trauma bay. Daniel was stable, his crisis had passed, but the questions remained. "Military experience," she said. Dr. Morrison said the technique was battlefield surgery. Marcus began mopping the floor around the trauma bed, his movements methodical and familiar. "Dr. Morrison is a perceptive man. Are you going to tell me the truth?" Marcus paused in his work. "The truth is that a young man is going to live instead of die. That's the only truth that matters." "That's not enough for me." Marcus looked at her with eyes that held depths she was only beginning to understand. "Dr. Mitchell, I've been mopping floors in this hospital for 3 years. I come to work, I do my job, I go home. That's my life now. But it wasn't always your life." "No," he admitted. "It wasn't." Sarah waited, sensing that he was on the verge of sharing something important. "I was a surgeon," Marcus said finally. "A long time ago. Different life, different person. I worked in places that don't exist on most maps, places where young men and women got shot and needed someone to put them back together quickly." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Military surgeon. Something like that. Why are you here? Why are you mopping floors when you could be saving lives in an operating room?" Marcus resumed his cleaning, but his movements had slowed. "Because some chapters of life have to end before new ones can begin. That doesn't make sense. You have skills that could save hundreds of lives. Why waste them?" "Who says I'm wasting them?" Marcus asked. "Tonight, one life was saved. That's not waste. That's purpose." Sarah shook her head in frustration. "You could be working as a surgeon. You could be teaching other doctors. You could be running a trauma program somewhere. I could be many things, Marcus interrupted quietly. But I choose to be here. Why? Marcus set down his mop and looked at her directly. Because sometimes, Dr. Mitchell, the best place to serve is the place where no one expects you to be. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself observing Marcus with new eyes. She noticed details she'd missed before. The way he moved with military precision. The way he seemed to anticipate medical emergencies before they happened. The way he positioned himself in rooms to have clear sight lines to all exits. She also began to research combat medicine, trying to understand the level of training that would produce the surgical skills she'd witnessed. What she learned made Marcus's presence at the hospital even more mysterious. Combat surgeons, she discovered, were among the most highly trained medical professionals in the world. They worked in conditions that civilian doctors couldn't imagine, performing life-saving procedures under enemy fire, with limited supplies, in makeshift operating rooms. The survival rates they achieved in impossible circumstances were legendary. But they also carried psychological burdens that most people couldn't understand. The constant exposure to trauma, the pressure of life and death decisions, the weight of responsibility for young soldiers' lives. It took a toll that many combat surgeons struggled with after returning to civilian life. Sarah began to understand that Marcus's quiet demeanor might not be personality trait, but a form of protection. Perhaps the invisibility he cultivated wasn't about being unnoticed, but about finding peace after years of being constantly noticed, constantly needed, constantly responsible for other people's survival. 3 weeks after the surgery, Sarah was working the night shift when she encountered Marcus in the hospital corridor. He was mopping as usual, moving with the same methodical precision she'd observed hundreds of times. "How is he?" Marcus asked without looking up. "Daniel? He's recovered completely. The surgery was perfect. No complications, no secondary bleeding. He was discharged last week." Marcus nodded, continuing his work. "His parents wanted to thank whoever saved him," Sarah continued. "They've been asking questions about the surgery, about who was involved. They can thank you. That's not right, and you know it." Marcus stopped mopping and looked at her. "Dr. Mitchell, let me ask you something. Are you satisfied with the work you do here?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean? Are you happy with the lives you save, the difference you make, the purpose you find in your profession?" "Yes, I suppose I am." "Then why do you need to know my story?" Sarah considered the question. "Because I think you're wasting your talents. I think you could be doing more, helping more people, making a bigger difference." "More according to whom?" "According to anyone who sees what you're capable of." Marcus picked up his mop again. "Dr. Mitchell, I spent 20 years doing more. I saved lives in places where death was the default outcome. I worked in conditions you can't imagine, under pressure you can't comprehend. I did more than most people could handle. So what changed? I got tired of war." The simple statement carried a weight that Sarah hadn't expected. She saw something in Marcus's expression that suggested depths of experience she couldn't begin to fathom. "So you became a janitor?" "I became a man who mops floors and occasionally helps save lives when the situation calls for it." "That's not enough." "It's enough for me." Sarah shook her head. "I don't understand how someone with your skills can be satisfied with what? With peace? With a job that doesn't require me to carry a weapon? With nights where I don't have to worry about whether the next patient will be someone I know? With work that ends when my shift ends, instead of following me home in nightmares?" The questions hung in the air, and Sarah began to understand that Marcus's story was more complex and more painful than she'd imagined. "You're hiding," she said finally. "I'm healing," Marcus corrected. "From what?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "From everything." Before Sarah could respond, her pager went off. "Emergency trauma, multiple victims. All hands to the emergency department." She looked at Marcus, then at her pager, then back at Marcus. "I have to go," she said. "I know. Will you tell me more later?" Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Dr. Mitchell, the most important thing I can tell you is that tonight, when you go into that trauma bay, you'll be better than you were before." "What do you mean?" "You'll be calmer, more confident, more skilled. That's what matters. Because of what you taught me. Because of what you learned about yourself." Sarah ran toward the emergency department, but Marcus's words stayed with her. In the trauma bay, she found herself working with a precision and confidence she'd never experienced before. She made decisions faster, worked more efficiently, and approached each case with skills she didn't know she possessed, It wasn't until later that she realized Marcus had given her more than surgical knowledge. He'd given her the confidence to trust her instincts, to work under pressure, to believe in her abilities even when the stakes were highest. And when she looked for him after her shift ended, he was gone. Not just from the hospital, but from the job entirely. His locker was empty, his time card showed he'd clocked out for the final time, and nobody seemed to know where he'd gone. The Human Resources Department said he'd given notice the day after Daniel's surgery. No forwarding address, no contact information, no explanation beyond a simple resignation letter that thanked the hospital for 3 years of employment. Doctor Sarah Mitchell never saw Marcus Chen again, but she carried his lessons with her for the rest of her career. She became one of Metropolitan General's most skilled trauma surgeons, known for her ability to remain calm under pressure and her expertise at handling the most difficult cases. She established a training program for emergency physicians, teaching them advanced trauma techniques and the importance of confidence in critical situations. Her program became a model for hospitals across the country. And sometimes, late at night when she was working alone in the trauma bay, she thought about the quiet janitor who changed her life in the space of a single evening. She wondered where he was, what he was doing, whether he was still helping people in ways they'd never fully understand. But mostly, she remembered what he taught her. That the most important service often comes from places where no one expects to find it, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never ask for recognition. Daniel Harrison, the patient Marcus saved that night, went on to live a full life. He became an engineer, got married, had children of his own. He never knew the name of the janitor who saved him, but he carried the gift of that extra time with gratitude, making the most of every day he'd been given. And somewhere, in another hospital, another emergency room, another place where life and death decisions are made in seconds, there might be another quiet figure in the background. Someone who seems unremarkable, who keeps to themselves, who has skills they never display unless the moment demands it. Because some of the most important people in our lives are the ones we never notice until the moment we need them most.